Good Wednesday morning, Amy Jacobson here. Paul Vallis in for Dan Proft. Always a pleasure. Thank you for coming in.
My pleasure.
I see you found your way this morning to the station, standing outside the door, waiting to be let in.
That's right.
But we always have a busy news day when you're here, so I really appreciate you coming in. Last year, remember last August at this time, we just recovered from the George Floyd riots all over the country, and then we had the incident, the police shooting in Kenosha, Wisconsin, with with Jacob Blake, and it sparked a lot of violence all over again, especially particularly in the town of Kenosha, Wisconsin, where that town was absolutely destroyed. And I went there a few months ago, and there's buildings that are still boarded up and businesses that are still boarded up from what happened. So with more on this and other things and talking about a new book, we want to welcome to the program James E. Ward Jr. He is pastor and founder of Insight Church in Skokie and author of Zero Victim, Overcoming Injustice with a New Attitude. Good morning, Mr. Ward. How are you?
Hey, Amy. I'm doing fantastic. And thank you so much for having me on, and welcome to Paul. Really an honor to be with you. Thank you.
Thank you. So tell us, because you are Jacob Blake's mother's pastor, correct?
That's correct. Yep. Julia Jackson has been a member of our church since the very beginning, and her mother as well, Janie Johnson. And now Jacob is an amazing family. And I really wish and look forward to the time when the nation will get the opportunity to really know the real Julia and Jacob Blake Jr. They're amazing people.
Well, tell us about Jacob Blake Jr., because it was how the media portrayed him accurate? I mean, they said that, he was there because, well, just tell us your version of what happened.
Yeah, the circumstances, are what they are, and I can't speak into the incident of itself, but I can speak to Jacob's character and what I've come to know him and what I know about he and his mother and his grandmother. He's an amazing father. He's part of our church. He's involved in prayer meetings in our church. And I look forward to the time when he'll have the opportunity to communicate his story. We're thankful that he's alive, which is not something that you would expect in a situation like this. But at some point, the nation is going to hear from Jacob, and I'll let Jacob tell Jacob's story. But I can say as his pastor, he's an amazing young man, and we're so proud of him.
Well, I'm glad that he's found God. Did he find God after this incident happened, or was he a parishioner before?
He grew up. His family is he and his mother and his grandmother have always been connected to the church. His grandmother was part of my father-in-law's church, as a matter of fact. And so you grow up in and around the things of God, but like so many of us, I think you stray away from those. But I would say certainly that since that time, he's grown much, much stronger in his faith. And it's just an amazing story of the redemptive power of Christ, which is something that we all need and live by. And so he'll have a tremendous story that's an encouragement to all of us, I think, of the power of God through his grace and his mercy to save and to rebuild and bring restoration to our lives.
Reverend Ward, you talk about rejecting victim mentality and ideologies like critical race theory. I've made an observation, being a longtime superintendent, that my fear with the critical race theory is what it will do to separate or to create friction between children and their parents. For example, I know a gifted teacher, remain unnamed, and she tells her white students that despite challenges that they may face, they still are privileged, and of course, and there's generational responsibility for racism. And then she tells the black children in her class that, for all practical purposes, they're victims, or they're the victims of historical racism. And my fear is what that does when the kids go home. The white the white kids have to be guided by their parents, who bear responsibility for institutional racism. But the black kids have to face their parents, who have allowed themselves to be exploited. And I don't know. Can you give me your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think you mentioned a key word, Paul, which is separation. I tell folks, and certainly being a pastor, speaking into these issues from a spiritual and moral perspective, Amy and Paul, we have a sin problem in our nation and not a skin problem. And the problem with critical race theory is that it is a theory. Theory is based upon man's idea. I say we need critical race theology and not create critical race theory. Theology is God's idea about circumstances. Theory is man's idea. And so my challenge with critical race theory is that it's based upon human perspective. It's based upon punitive and not redemptive at all in nation. And victim mentality, victim thinking is the soil from which critical race theory grows. When we think of zero victim mentality, that is the mind of Christ himself. And so I'd like to say in our nation right now, we need critical race theology, not critical race theory that is based upon man's ideas and something that's being weaponized and politicized to bring division when God always unifies. We have to continue to be one nation under God. Whenever you remove God from society, human consciousness goes with it. The human conscience goes with it. We have a deficit spiritually and morally, a breakdown of spiritual and moral law in our nation, which allows these ideas like critical race theory that may have an element of truth to them, but those things become perverted and corrupt when you take faith and you take truth out of the perspective. And so we got to get our nation brought back to being one nation under God. And that's what we're here to do. To keep that righteous and that godly influence in society.
Then, Pastor Ward, what's your thinking on Black Lives Matter and on President Trump?
Sure. So it's very, very simple. I tell folks, I get that question a lot, Amy. For me, Black Lives Matter because I'm Black, my wife is Black, my children are Black. Of course we matter. We matter to God. So for me, that is not a question. It's never been a question in terms of my value and my identity. And so the concept, we have to separate the idea from the organization. And so the idea matters because we're human and we matter. But the organization, in terms of what it represents, in terms of its values and its objectives and the things that it seeks to accomplish, is not something that we subscribe to and endorse because it does not line up with our Christian faith. And so I like to make the distinction between there. I think that Black Lives Matter overall is a cry of pain when people are hurting. I think that Black Americans, when we're hurting, there's a cry for pain, but the way that we're going about it to bring resolution to those issues is not God's way. And when you mention President Trump, personally, on a personal basis, having the opportunity to have had conversation with him multiple times on the phone and work with his staff, I don't have any problems, with him. I'm here to serve. I don't have any problems with President Biden. I'm here to serve whoever the sitting president is. And so I find myself in a position that we tell folks that we're not on the right or the left. We're here to call folks on the right and the left above back into the kingdom of God. I think we made the mistake of allowing folks to think that it's about right versus left instead of right versus wrong. And so we got to come back to a place of really seeing our nation built upon the truth of God's word, which will benefit every citizen. And I was thankful for the time that we had to interact with President Trump.
All right. And that your book is called Zero Victim. Why did you decide to write it?
I wrote it because of, Amy, this is something that is how I live my life. I grew up in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, at the very end of the segregation of the school system. And in a short version of the story, when I realized that my performance and my ability to do well had nothing to do with the environment around me, going to the white side of town in third grade, when I realized that I was intelligent and I was smart and I could perform well, I realized that the white kids around me were not against me. And it freed something on the inside of me. It liberated me from the mentality of defeat. And from that point, it changed the trajectory of my life, that my relationships have always been high quality relationships. We're intended to live life from the inside out, not from the outside in. And we can't control what we go through, but we can control how we go through it. And so there has to be a shift in victim thinking, which has inundated our society right now. And I'll give you the short version of how zero victim is connected to our faith. You think about Jesus Christ. He's the only innocent man that ever lived on the planet, and he suffered the greatest injustice that the world has ever known, of being crucified. But while being crucified and the nails are still being driven in his hand, Amy and Paul, he's already praying, Father, forgive them, because they don't know what they're doing. Okay. That is the standard of how we deal for injustice. And every other injustice is a lesser injustice. And so grace and the mercy of God, the capacity to forgive, has been given to us through faith. I tell our church folks even, I love the grand wizard of the case, whoever the guy is, because I am not a victim, and the love of God in me is greater than the hatred in him. If we can get that mindset reintroduced to our nation. There's no injustice. There's no problem that we can't overcome. We got to call our nation back to faith in God. And we're here to do that. I really want to encourage your listeners to go to zerovictim.com, zerovictim.com. Please get a copy of the book. I think this is something that our nation needs right now. And we're grateful for your help in getting the word out.
All right. Thank you so much, Pastor.
Very good.
Again,
Thank you.
Zerovictim.com is where you can pre-order your book. Thanks so much, Pastor Ward. We appreciate it.
My pleasure. And thank you. Hope to be with you again. All the best.
Thank you. You too. And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
Listen to podcasts of Dan and Amy from the AM 560 mobile app. Download it today at 560theanswer.com/mobile.
This is attorney Stephen Leahy. This isn't the first crisis we faced together. Back in '08, business professionals in trouble sought help from bankruptcy attorneys, loan modification attorneys, foreclosure defense attorneys, and IRS attorneys trying to gain full financial recovery. They should have just called me. Let me tell you about Chuck. His small business crashed in the '08 crisis. He faced 2 foreclosures, overbearing creditors, and the dreaded IRS. Chuck would not even get out of bed in the morning. His wife heard me on the radio and convinced him to hire me. We got Chuck a loan modification and a short sale. We obtained a discharge of his debt and settled what was left of his IRS liability. Now Chuck is back in business and in control of his life. You can hear Chuck tell his own story at fullfinancialrecovery.com.